Montana Territory, 1871. Dust swirled across the plains as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Quinn Blackett pulled his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the harsh glare as he surveyed the landscape before him. At 25, he had already seen more death and hardship than most men twice his age. The Civil War had taken his father and brother, and the unforgiving frontier had claimed his mother to fever. All that remained was the small parcel of land he'd staked his claim on, and the conviction that solitude was the only certainty in a world determined to take everything from him. A man who trusts another is just waiting to be betrayed, Quinn muttered to himself as he guided his chestnut mare toward the distant silhouette of Copper Creek. The town had grown since he'd last ridden through, new buildings sprouting up like weeds after a spring rain. His lean frame sat easy in the saddle, years of breaking horses and driving cattle evident in the fluid way he moved. Despite the trail dust that clung to his blue cotton shirt and worn denim pants, there was an undeniable handsomeness to his features: sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw with a day's worth of stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. Quinn had come to town for supplies, nothing more. The less time spent around others, the better. People complicated things, asked questions, expected answers. In his experience, connections only gave life more places to wound you. Better to rely on himself, his horse, and his Winchester. At least they wouldn't leave when times got hard. The main street bustled with activity as Quinn dismounted and secured his horse at the hitching post outside the general store. He adjusted his gun belt, more out of habit than necessity, and pushed through the door, the small bell announcing his arrival. The store was larger than he remembered, shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to ready-made clothing. Quinn nodded curtly to the shopkeeper and began gathering what he needed: coffee, flour, ammunition, and a few other necessities that would keep him going for another month of solitude at his homestead. "Will that be all for you today, sir?" a soft voice asked from behind the counter. Quinn looked up, words dying on his lips as his eyes met hers. The young woman standing before him couldn't have been more than 21, with honey blonde hair tucked neatly beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was practical but flattering, the blue calico emphasizing her slender waist and bringing out the deep azure of her eyes. "Sir," she prompted again, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Quinn cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am, just these items." "You're new to town," she observed, not a question but a statement as she began tallying his purchases. "Passing through," he replied curtly, reaching for his money pouch. "Most people who are just passing through don't buy enough supplies to last a month." Her observation was delivered with a smile that somehow dismantled his usual defenses. "I have a place, north of here. Keep to myself, mostly. I'm Beatrice Thornton. My uncle owns this store." She extended her hand, a gesture so unexpected that Quinn found himself taking it before he could think better of it. "Quinn Blackett," he replied, surprised by the firmness of her handshake. "Well, Mr. Blackett, your total comes to $4.65. Quinn counted out the money, acutely aware of her presence. There was something about Beatrice Thornton that unsettled him, not in the way that danger did, but in a way that made him feel as though the ground beneath his feet had shifted ever so slightly. "There's a social at the church Saturday evening," she said as she wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "Most everyone in town attends." Quinn secured his hat and gathered his supplies. "I'm not much for socials, Miss Thornton." "That's a shame," she replied, her gaze direct and unabashed. "Sometimes the things we avoid are exactly what we need most." Quinn tipped his hat and turned to leave, determined to put the town and the unsettling Miss Thornton behind him as quickly as possible. He had nearly reached the door when the sound of breaking glass and angry voices erupted from the street outside. Two men were locked in a violent struggle, crashing into the water trough as a small crowd gathered. Quinn instinctively stepped back, wanting no part in the town's troubles. "That's my cousin," Beatrice said, suddenly beside him, "the one in the blue shirt." Before Quinn could respond, one of the men drew a pistol. Without thinking, Quinn moved, bursting through the door and crossing the distance in 3 long strides. His hand clamped down on the gunman's wrist, forcing it upward as the weapon discharged harmlessly into the air. "That's enough," Quinn said, his voice low and dangerous as he twisted the gun from the man's grasp. "This ain't your fight, stranger," the man snarled, alcohol heavy on his breath. "It is now." Quinn kept his grip firm. "Walk away before this gets worse for you." For a tense moment, the man seemed ready to challenge him, but something in Quinn's steady gaze must have conveyed the depth of his resolve. With a final curse, the man yanked his arm free and stumbled away down the street. "You all right?" Quinn asked the young man who must be Beatrice's cousin. The family resemblance was clear in the same blue eyes and determined chin. "Yes, thank you," he extended his hand. "James Thornton, that was Hank Wilcox, got it in his head that I cheated him at cards last night." "Did you?" Quinn asked bluntly. James laughed, surprised by the direct question. "No, sir. I won fair and square. Hank just doesn't take losing well, especially when whiskey's involved." Quinn handed the confiscated pistol to the town marshal who had finally arrived, then turned to find Beatrice standing in the doorway of the store, her expression a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name. "Seems I'm in your debt, Mr. Blackett," she said as he approached to retrieve his supplies. "No debt, anyone would have done the same." "No," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "They wouldn't have. Most would have looked the other way." Quinn shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, unused to being the object of anyone's attention, let alone admiration. "I should get going. Daylight's burning." "The social," Beatrice said, "Saturday at 7. I hope you'll reconsider." Quinn gathered his purchases and mounted his horse, telling himself that the only reason he hadn't immediately refused was because he was in a hurry to leave town. It had nothing to do with the way her eyes had held his, or the strange, forgotten feeling that had stirred in his chest when she smiled. As he rode out of Copper Creek, Quinn pushed thoughts of Beatrice Thornton firmly aside. The frontier was no place for distractions, and sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. His life was what it was, solitary, hard but uncomplicated, just the way he needed it to be. Yet as the miles stretched between him and town, he found himself glancing back more than once, the memory of a blue calico dress and direct azure eyes following him all the way home. Saturday evening found Quinn standing before the small, cracked mirror in his cabin, attempting to tame his dark hair into some semblance of order. He told himself he was just going into town for more ammunition. The general store would be open before the social began. The fact that he had shaved, put on his one good shirt, and polished his boots was merely coincidental. "You're a damn fool, Blackett," he muttered to his reflection, but he saddled his horse anyway. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek as Quinn arrived. The church at the far end of town glowed with lamplight, the sounds of a fiddle and laughter spilling into the evening air. Quinn tied his horse outside the general store, relieved to see it was still open as he'd hoped. The bell jingled as he entered, but instead of Mr. Thornton, it was Beatrice who stood behind the counter, arranging items in a display case. She looked up, surprise registering on her face before blooming into a smile that made Quinn's carefully constructed defenses waver. "Mr. Blackett," she said, smoothing down her dress, a pretty rose-colored affair that made her skin glow in the lamplight. "I didn't expect to see you in town again so soon." "Needed more ammunition," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the store where such items were kept. It wasn't entirely a lie, he would need more eventually. Beatrice's eyes, observant and intelligent, took in his clean-shaven face and pressed shirt. "Of course, though you seem rather dressed up for a simple supply run." Quinn cleared his throat. "I remembered what you said." "About the social." Her smile widened. "Does that mean you'll be attending after all?" "I thought I might stop by, briefly." He shifted his weight, unaccustomed to the unfamiliar territory of social invitations. "Then allow me to close up here and accompany you," Beatrice said, already reaching for her shawl. "Uncle is already there, helping with the preparations." Before Quinn could formulate a reason why this was a bad idea, they were walking together down the main street, the church growing closer with each step. Quinn couldn't remember the last time he'd walked alongside a woman, matching his long stride to her shorter one, the scent of lavender water occasionally catching on the evening breeze. "You're not from around here originally, are you, Mr. Blackett?" Beatrice asked as they walked. "Number Missouri originally. Came west after the war." "The war between the states claimed many lives," she said softly. "We lost my father at Gettysburg." Quinn glanced at her, seeing the flash of old sorrow in her eyes. "My father and brother at Shiloh. Mother to fever 2 years later." I'm sorry, her hand briefly touched his arm, a gesture of genuine sympathy that made him both want to pull away and lean closer. Is that why you keep to yourself? Because you've lost so much. The question was too direct, too perceptive. Quinn stopped walking, turning to face her. Miss Thornton, I don't mean any disrespect, but my reasons are my own. She met his gaze evenly. Of course. I apologize for prying. It's just, sometimes it helps to know we're not alone in our grief. There was something in her voice, a deeper understanding that suggested she knew more about loss than just her father. Before Quinn could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of James Thornton and a pretty young woman he introduced as his fiancée. The church social was unlike anything Quinn had experienced in years. The simple wooden building had been transformed with paper streamers and wildflowers. Tables lined the walls, laden with every kind of pie, cake, and home-cooked dish imaginable. A small group of musicians played lively tunes in the corner while couples danced and children darted between the adults. Quinn stood awkwardly at the edge of the gathering, a cup of punch in his hand, watching as Beatrice was swept up in conversation with various townspeople. She moved through the crowd with easy grace, clearly well-liked by everyone. Several times she glanced in his direction, offering a smile that somehow eased his discomfort. She's something special, that one, a voice said beside him. Quinn turned to find Mr. Thornton, Beatrice's uncle, a stout man with kind eyes and graying temples. She seems well regarded in town, Quinn replied neutrally. More than that. After her parents died, she could have gone east to live with her mother's family, had prospects there, education, society, suitors from good families. But she chose to stay here, help me with the store, become part of this community. Mr. Thornton sipped his punch. Takes a special kind of loyalty to choose a harder path when an easier one is offered. Before Quinn could respond, Beatrice appeared before them, slightly flushed from dancing. Uncle, Mrs. Henderson is looking for you, something about the punch needing more sugar, she said, then turned to Quinn. You haven't danced once, Mr. Blackett. I don't dance, Miss Thornton. Everyone can dance, she countered. Some just need the right partner to show them how. She held out her hand, a challenge in her eyes. Maybe it was the warmth of the room, or the unaccustomed punch, or simply the way she looked at him, as if she could see past all his carefully constructed barriers. But Quinn found himself taking her hand and allowing her to lead him onto the dance floor just as the musicians began a slower tune. I should warn you, he said quietly as he cautiously placed his hand at her waist. The last time I danced was before the war. Then we'll go slowly, Beatrice replied, her hand light but steady on his shoulder. They moved awkwardly at first, Quinn too conscious of his boots and the proximity of her body. But gradually he found the rhythm, guided by her gentle pressure and encouraging smile. By the end of the song they were moving together with surprising ease. See, Beatrice said as the music ended, you just needed to remember. Quinn looked down at her, struck by how the lamplight caught in her honey-blonde hair, how her eyes seemed to reflect some inner light of their own. Some things are better forgotten, Miss Thornton. And some, she replied softly, are worth remembering no matter how painful. The evening passed more quickly than Quinn expected. He found himself drawn into conversations with the townspeople, answering questions about his homestead, even sharing a few carefully edited stories from his time driving cattle in Texas. All the while, he was aware of Beatrice, her laugh across the room, the way she knelt to comfort a crying child, her animated gestures as she spoke with the older women of the town. It was nearly midnight when the social began to wind down. Quinn, surprising himself, had stayed until the end. May I walk you home? He asked Beatrice as she gathered her shawl. I'd like that, she replied. The night air was cool after the warmth of the church, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked in companionable silence for a time, the sounds of the dispersing social fading behind them. Thank you for coming tonight, Beatrice said as they approached the small house she shared with her uncle behind the general store. I enjoyed it more than I expected, Quinn admitted. Will we see you in town again soon? Quinn hesitated. The evening had been pleasant, unexpectedly so, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping onto dangerous ground. Connections meant vulnerability, and vulnerability inevitably led to loss. I'm not sure that would be wise, Miss Thornton. Beatrice, she corrected gently, and why wouldn't it be wise? Because Quinn struggled to articulate the conviction that had guided him for years. The frontier is no place for complications. Is that what I am, a complication? There was no hurt in her voice, only genuine curiosity. People like me do better alone, Beatrice, it's safer. For everyone. She studied him in the moonlight, her gaze disconcertingly perceptive. Safer, perhaps, but is it better? Is that truly what you believe, Quinn Blackett? The sound of his name on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. It's what I know. They had reached her door and Beatrice turned to face him fully. Then I won't press you, but should you change your mind, Copper Creek isn't so very far from your homestead. Good night, Beatrice, Quinn said, tipping his hat. Good night, Quinn, she paused, then added softly. Sometimes the things we think we know are just the things we're most afraid to question. As he rode home under the star-filled sky, Quinn told himself that he would return to his solitary existence and put the evening and Beatrice Thornton behind him. Yet he knew, with a certainty that both alarmed and exhilarated him, that it wouldn't be that simple. Something had changed tonight, some dormant part of himself awakening. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, Beatrice Thornton had become more than a complication. She had become a question he wasn't sure he had the courage to answer. 2 weeks passed, and despite his best efforts, Quinn couldn't shake the memory of Beatrice Thornton from his thoughts. He threw himself into work on his homestead, mending fences, breaking a new horse, expanding the small garden beside his cabin. But her words followed him like shadows at dusk. Sometimes the things we think we know are just the things we're most afraid to question. On the 15th day, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Quinn made the decision to ride into town. He told himself it was for supplies, nothing more, but he knew the lie even as he thought it. Copper Creek was unusually quiet, the impending storm driving most folks indoors. Quinn secured his horse outside the general store, hesitating a moment before pushing through the door. Mr. Thornton looked up from behind the counter. Mr. Blackett. Was beginning to wonder if we'd see you again. Need some supplies before the storm hits, Quinn said, removing his hat. Well, you're in luck, just got a shipment in yesterday. Mr. Thornton gestured toward the back of the store. Beatrice is inventorying it now. I'm sure she'd be happy to help you find what you need. Quinn found her in the storeroom, a pencil tucked behind her ear as she counted sacks of flour. She looked up at his approach, surprise giving way to a smile that made his heart beat a little faster. Quinn, she said, dusting her hands on her apron. I was beginning to think you'd taken my advice about questioning what you know a bit too literally and decided to question whether Copper Creek actually existed. Her teasing tone drew an unexpected laugh from him. The homestead needed work. For 2 entire weeks, her eyebrow arched skeptically. Perhaps I needed the time to think as well. And what conclusion did you reach during all this thinking? Quinn stepped closer, emboldened by the privacy of the storeroom. That I might have been wrong about complications, always being something to avoid. Beatrice's smile softened. That's a promising start. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the front of the store. A man's voice, loud and slurred, demanded attention. Where is she? I know she's here. Quinn recognized the voice immediately. Hank Wilcox, the drunk he'd disarmed weeks earlier. Beatrice tensed beside him, her hand instinctively reaching for his arm. He's been causing trouble since that day, she whispered. Blames James for his losing his job at the sawmill after word got around about him pulling a gun in the street. Quinn moved toward the front, positioning himself between Beatrice and whatever was happening. In the main part of the store, Wilcox was leaning heavily on the counter, a nearly empty bottle in his hand. Mr. Wilcox, Mr. Thornton was saying firmly, I think you should leave. You're not welcome here in this condition. Not until I see that pretty niece of yours, Wilcox slurred. She can give a message to her cousin about what happens to men who ruin another man's livelihood. Quinn stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. Wilcox, you're drunk, go home. The man's bloodshot eyes narrowed as recognition dawned. You, the hero, he spat the word like a curse. This ain't none of your business, cowboy. I'm making it my business, Quinn replied evenly. Walk out now while you still can. Wilcox laughed an ugly sound. Or what, you'll shoot me, in front of witnesses, don't think so. He took a menacing step forward. Word is, you live all alone out past Carson's Creek. Man who lives alone should be careful about making enemies in town. The threat hung in the air like gunsmoke. Quinn's hand hovered near his sidearm, but he knew Wilcox was right. Drawing on an unarmed man, even a threatening drunk, would bring more trouble than it solved. Last chance Wilcox leave now. For a tense moment, it seemed Wilcox might press the confrontation, but something in Quinn's steady gaze must have penetrated his alcohol-addled mind. With a final curse, he threw the empty bottle against the wall and staggered out into the gathering storm. "Thank you," Mr. Thornton said once the door slammed shut. "That man's trouble. Been worse since his wife left him last month." "He threatened you," Quinn said, turning to Beatrice, who had followed him to the front of the store. "Both of you." "Hank Wilcox makes a lot of threats," she replied, though her face was pale. "Most are forgotten by morning." "And the ones that aren't?" Quinn pressed. Mr. Thornton sighed heavily. "Marshall's aware of the situation, not much more to be done until Wilcox actually breaks the law." Thunder rumbled outside, and rain began to pelt the windows. Quinn knew he should start for home before the storm worsened, but the thought of leaving Beatrice with Wilcox's threat hanging over her made something twist painfully in his chest. "I'll stay in town tonight," he decided. "Make sure he doesn't come back." "That's not necessary," Beatrice began, but her uncle interrupted. "Actually, I'd feel better knowing you were nearby, Mr. Blackett. The rooms above the saloon are clean enough, and not expensive." "Then it's settled," Quinn said, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll get a room and check back on you both after dinner." As he turned to leave, Beatrice caught his arm. "Have dinner with us instead," she said quietly. "Uncle makes an excellent stew and—" She hesitated, then finished softly, "I'd like the company." The simple admission, offered with such honesty, broke through the last of Quinn's resistance. "I'd be honored." The storm raged through dinner, but inside the Thornton home, warm lamplight and good food created an atmosphere of comfort that Quinn had nearly forgotten could exist. They spoke of everyday things: the store, Quinn's progress on his homestead, the coming harvest season, carefully avoiding mention of Wilcox and his threats. After Mr. Thornton retired for the evening, claiming fatigue, Quinn and Beatrice sat by the fire in the small parlor. Rain lashed against the windows, but the room was snug and warm. "Tell me about your homestead," Beatrice said, her hands busy with mending as she sat across from him. Quinn described the small cabin, the creek that ran along the northern edge of his property, the stands of pine that provided shelter for deer and other game. As he spoke, he realized how long it had been since he'd shared conversation like this with anyone, simple, unguarded talk about everyday life. "It sounds lovely," Beatrice said when he finished. "Lonely perhaps, but beautiful." "I never thought of it as lonely," Quinn admitted, "until recently." Her eyes met his across the room, understanding passing between them without words. "What changed?" Quinn considered his answer carefully. "I came to town for supplies and met a shopkeeper who asked too many questions." Beatrice laughed, the sound warming him more than the fire. "Impertinent of her." "Extremely," he agreed with a smile, "but she made me remember something I'd been trying to forget." "And what was that?" "That walls keep things out, but they also keep you in." Quinn leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I built my life around not needing anyone after the war. It seemed safer that way. And now," Beatrice set aside her mending, her full attention on him, "now I'm not so sure." He met her gaze directly. "Beatrice, I'm not good at this, at letting people in, but I'd like to try. If you're willing to be patient." Her smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I think patience is a small price to pay for something worthwhile, Quinn Blackett." The crack of a gunshot outside shattered the moment. Quinn was on his feet instantly, drawing his pistol as he moved to the window. "Stay back," he ordered Beatrice, peering cautiously through the curtains. The rain made visibility poor, but he could make out a figure staggering down the street. "It's Wilcox," he said grimly, firing into the air. "I should get Uncle," Beatrice said, moving toward the stairs. "No," Quinn stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Let him sleep. I'll handle this." "Quinn, trust me," he held her gaze. "Please." After a moment she nodded. "Be careful." Quinn checked his weapon and slipped out into the rain. The street had turned to mud, his boots sinking with each step as he approached Wilcox, who was now leaning against a hitching post, ranting incoherently. "Wilcox," Quinn called, keeping a safe distance. "That's enough, you're disturbing the peace." The drunk squinted through the rain. "You again, always you." He raised his pistol unsteadily. "Should have minded your own business, cowboy." Quinn kept his own weapon lowered but ready. "This is my business now. Put the gun down before someone gets hurt." "Too late for that," Wilcox slurred. "Already hurt, everything gone, wife job." "Respect all gone." For a moment, Quinn saw past the drunken rage to the broken man beneath, someone who had lost everything and didn't know how to begin again. It was a reflection that hit uncomfortably close to home. "I understand loss, Wilcox," Quinn said, his voice steady despite the rain soaking through his clothes. "But this isn't the way to deal with it." "What do you know about it?" Wilcox spat. "Living out there all alone, no one to disappoint you, no one to leave you." "I know more than you think." Quinn took a careful step closer. "I lost my family in the war, every last one of them. Spent years believing being alone was safer, but I was wrong, and so are you." Something in his words seemed to reach Wilcox. The man's gun hand wavered, then slowly lowered. "What else is there?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "A chance to start over," Quinn replied. "But first you need to give me the gun." For a tense moment, Quinn wasn't sure if Wilcox would comply, or if the situation would escalate into violence. Then with a defeated slump of his shoulders, Wilcox held out the pistol. Quinn took it carefully, emptying the chambers before tucking it into his belt. "Come on," he said, taking Wilcox by the arm. "Let's get you to the marshal. You can sleep it off in a cell tonight, figure out what comes next in the morning." By the time Quinn had delivered Wilcox to the marshal and explained the situation, the rain had slackened to a gentle patter. He returned to the Thornton home to find Beatrice waiting anxiously by the door. "Is everything all right?" she asked, helping him remove his sodden coat. "It is now," Quinn assured her. "Wilcox is sleeping it off in the marshal's office. No one was hurt." "You're soaked through," she fretted, guiding him back to the fire. "You'll catch your death." "Worth it," Quinn said, catching her hand as she arranged a blanket around his shoulders. "To know you're safe." Beatrice stilled, her eyes meeting his. "You risked yourself for a man who threatened you, who threatened us. Why?" Quinn considered her question seriously. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Even a drunk like Wilcox." He paused, then added softly, "Even a stubborn cowboy who's been hiding from life for too long." "Quinn," Beatrice began, but words seemed to fail her. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, her lips warm against his rain-chilled skin. "What was that for?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "For being the kind of man who sees beyond his own pain to help others," she replied. "For being brave enough to question what you thought you knew." In that moment, with rain tapping against the windows and firelight dancing across Beatrice's face, Quinn knew with absolute clarity that his solitary existence had ended the moment he'd walked into her uncle's store. Whether he had been ready to admit it or not, Beatrice Thornton had awakened something in him that couldn't be silenced again. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Spring turned to summer, and Quinn found himself in Copper Creek more often than not. What had begun as weekly visits for supplies became twice-weekly dinners with the Thorntons, then almost daily excursions to help with deliveries or repairs at the store. He still maintained his homestead, riding out early in the mornings to tend to his animals and crops, but increasingly Copper Creek and Beatrice drew him back before sunset. The townsfolk grew accustomed to seeing the once solitary cowboy walking alongside Beatrice Thornton down the main street, or sitting beside her in church on Sundays. There were knowing glances and whispered speculations, but Quinn found that he minded less than he would have expected. "You're different," Beatrice observed one evening as they sat on the porch of her uncle's house, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "From when we first met." "How so?" Quinn asked, though he knew the answer better than anyone. "You smile more," she said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You look people in the eye when they speak to you. You seem at peace." Quinn considered her words. "I suppose I am, more than I've been in a very long time." "Because of Copper Creek?" Beatrice asked, a teasing note in her voice. Because of you, he replied honestly, covering her hand with his own. You made me remember that there's more to life than just surviving. Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder, her honey-blonde hair catching the last golden rays of sunlight. I think we reminded each other. They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened into night, content simply to be in each other's presence. Quinn marveled at how natural it felt, this quiet intimacy that had grown between them over the summer months. The walls he had built around his heart hadn't crashed down in a dramatic moment. Rather, they had been gently dismantled, brick, by Beatrice's patience and understanding. I should go, he said reluctantly when the first stars appeared in the sky. Early start tomorrow. Must you? Beatrice asked, her voice soft in the darkness. Uncle wouldn't mind if you stayed for supper again. Quinn smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. If I keep eating here every night, your uncle will start charging me room and board. Or expecting a proposal, Beatrice replied, then immediately blushed at her own boldness. Quinn's heart skipped a beat at her words. They hadn't spoken of marriage, though he'd thought of little else these past weeks. He'd been waiting for the right moment, uncertain if Beatrice would want to tie her future to a man still learning how to live again after years of emotional solitude. Would that be so terrible? He asked carefully, watching her face in the soft glow from the porch lantern. Beatrice met his gaze steadily. No, Quinn, it wouldn't be terrible at all. He cupped her face gently, thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. I don't have much to offer, Beatrice. A small homestead, a hard life. I can't give you the comforts you deserve. I don't want comforts, she replied, her hand coming up to cover his. I want a life with meaning, with purpose, with love. She paused, her eyes searching his. With you. Quinn leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered, the words he'd held back for weeks finally finding voice. More than I thought possible. And I love you, Beatrice responded, her voice sure and clear. Their first kiss was gentle, a tender promise in the summer darkness. When they parted, Quinn felt a sense of homecoming more powerful than anything he'd experienced since before the war. I should still go, he said reluctantly. But I'll be back tomorrow. There's something I need to ask your uncle. Beatrice's smile was radiant. He'll say yes, you know, he's quite fond of you. Even so, Quinn replied, standing and settling his hat on his head, some things should be done properly. He kissed her once more before descending the porch steps. As he mounted his horse and turned toward his homestead, Quinn felt a lightness in his spirit that had been absent for years. The solitary path he had chosen after the war had seemed the safest choice then, a way to protect himself from further loss. But Beatrice had shown him that true safety wasn't found in isolation, but in having someone to walk beside you through life's uncertainties. Tomorrow, he would ask for her hand. Tonight, he would ride home beneath the stars, his heart full with the knowledge that he was no longer alone. The late summer sky blazed with stars as Quinn rode toward his homestead, his mind filled with thoughts of Beatrice and their future together. So preoccupied was he that he almost missed the faint glow on the horizon, a glow that shouldn't have been there. As realization dawned, Quinn urged his horse to a gallop. The glow grew brighter as he approached, until there was no mistaking what he was seeing. His cabin was engulfed in flames. He reached the homestead just as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The heat was intense, forcing him to keep his distance as he circled the burning structure, calling out on the slim chance that someone might be inside. But Quinn knew the truth. He had left no lanterns burning, no fire in the hearth. This was no accident. As he surveyed the destruction of everything he had built, a movement near the tree line caught his attention. Instinctively, Quinn drew his pistol and took cover behind his water trough. Show yourself, he called out, his voice steady despite the rage and grief churning inside him. For a moment there was only silence broken by the crackling of flames. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. It's me, Blackett, don't shoot. Quinn recognized James Thornton, Beatrice's cousin, his face smudged with soot and grime. James. What are you doing here? Trying to save what I could, James replied, gesturing to a small pile of possessions, Quinn's saddle, a trunk of clothes, and a few other items, stacked a safe distance from the fire. I was riding past on my way back from the Carson Ranch when I saw the flames. By the time I got here, it was too late to save the cabin. Quinn lowered his weapon, processing this information. Did you see anyone? Anything suspicious? James shook his head. No one but Quinn, this wasn't an accident. He held up a broken bottle, the smell of kerosene still clinging to the glass. Someone wanted to make sure nothing survived. Wilcox, Quinn said grimly, remembering the drunk's threats. He was released from jail 2 days ago. That would be my guess, James agreed. He was in the saloon earlier, running his mouth about settling scores. I didn't think much of it. He's always talking big when he's drinking. Quinn holstered his pistol, a cold determination settling over him. I need to get to town, alert the marshal. What about all this? James gestured to the burning remains of the cabin. Nothing to be done now, Quinn replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. Fire will burn itself out eventually. As they mounted their horses, James glanced at Quinn. Where will you stay? Quinn didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The loss of his homestead, the place he had built with his own hands, his refuge after the war, should have devastated him. Yet what he felt most strongly was not grief for the cabin, but fear for what might have happened had Beatrice been with him. I'll figure something out, he finally replied. First, I need to make sure the Thorntons are safe. They rode hard through the night, reaching Copper Creek just as false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The town was quiet, most citizens still asleep in their beds. Quinn headed straight for the marshal's office but found it empty. Marshal Dawson was likely at home, unaware of the night's events. I'll find the marshal, James offered. You go check on Beatrice and Uncle. Quinn nodded gratefully and made his way to the Thornton home behind the general store. As he approached, he was relieved to see no signs of disturbance. The house stood peaceful in the pre-dawn light, windows dark, porch empty. He was about to knock when the door opened, revealing Beatrice in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She gasped at the sight of him, covered in soot and smelling of smoke. Quinn, what's happened? Are you hurt? I'm fine, he assured her, stepping inside as she pulled him through the doorway. But my cabin, it's gone. Burned to the ground. Burned, her face paled. How? Arson, almost certainly Wilcox. Quinn ran a hand through his hair, leaving a smudge of ash on his forehead. Is your uncle here? You both need to be careful. If Wilcox is targeting me, he might come after anyone connected to me. Uncle left yesterday for Helena, Beatrice explained, leading Quinn to the kitchen where she poured him a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Supply negotiations with the railroad. He won't be back for 3 days. Quinn took the coffee gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. You shouldn't stay here alone. I'm not defenseless, Quinn. Uncle taught me to shoot years ago. She gestured toward a shotgun mounted above the kitchen door. But I agree it would be foolish to take unnecessary risks. Before Quinn could respond, a knock at the door startled them both. He moved instinctively to place himself between Beatrice and potential danger, drawing his pistol. Who is it? Beatrice called. James and Marshal Dawson, came the reply. Quinn relaxed slightly, holstering his weapon as Beatrice opened the door to admit her cousin and the town lawman. Marshal Dawson was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, his weathered face serious as he removed his hat. Mr. Blackett. Sorry about your place. James filled me in on what happened. Any sign of Wilcox? Quinn asked. Not yet. I've got men looking, but he could be anywhere by now. The marshal's expression was grim. This is serious business, burning a man's home. When we find him, he'll face charges. If you find him, Quinn corrected, his tone hard. Marshal Dawson fixed him with a stern look. Now, Mr. Blackett, I understand you're angry. Rightfully so, but I can't have you taking the law into your own hands. That's not how we do things in Copper Creek. And how do you do things, Marshal? Wait until he burns down the general store next. Or worse. Beatrice laid a gentle hand on Quinn's arm. Quinn, please, the Marshal is right. Vengeance won't solve anything. The touch of her hand calmed him somewhat, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. Quinn had never considered himself a vengeful man, but the thought of Wilcox threatening Beatrice, even indirectly, awakened something primal within him. What do you suggest, then? He asked the Marshal, making an effort to keep his voice level. For now, I suggest you get some rest. You look dead on your feet, Marshal Dawson replied. We'll keep searching for Wilcox. In the meantime, perhaps it would be best if Miss Thornton stayed with a friend or neighbor until her uncle returns. She can stay with Emily and me, James offered, referring to his fiancée. We have plenty of room. Beatrice nodded. That seems sensible. I'll pack a few things. As she disappeared upstairs, Marshal Dawson pulled Quinn aside. There's something else you should know. Wilcox wasn't alone at the saloon yesterday. He was talking with two strangers, rough-looking types. No one recognized them. Quinn's jaw tightened. You think they helped him burn my place? It's possible, which is why I want you to be especially careful. If Wilcox has hired help, this could be more dangerous than a simple grudge. After the marshal left, promising to return with any news, Quinn sank into a kitchen chair, the full weight of the night's events finally catching up to him. Not only had he lost his home, but now Beatrice was potentially in danger because of his connection to her. You should go with James now, he told her when she returned downstairs with a small valise. It's not safe for you to be seen with me until Wilcox is caught. Beatrice set down her bag and came to stand before him, her expression resolute. Quinn Blackett, if you think I'm going to let some drunken coward dictate who I spend time with, you don't know me very well at all. Despite everything, Quinn found himself smiling at her spirit. I'm serious, Beatrice. Wilcox is dangerous, especially now that he's escalated to arson. And I'm serious too, she replied, taking his hands in hers. We will face this together. Just as we'll face everything else that life brings our way. She paused, then added softly, that is, if you still want to ask my uncle that question when he returns. Quinn drew her closer, resting his forehead against hers. More than ever, he whispered. But Beatrice, you need to understand I have nothing now. No home, no land worth speaking of. Just my horse and whatever James managed to salvage from the fire. Do you think I care about that? Beatrice pulled back to look him in the eyes. Quinn, I love you, not your cabin or your land, you. Her words washed over him like a benediction, easing some of the tension that had knotted his shoulders since discovering the fire. Quinn had spent so many years believing that he needed nothing and no one. That strength came from self-reliance. Yet here was Beatrice, offering him a different kind of strength, one born of shared burdens and mutual support. I love you, he said simply, the words inadequate to express the depth of his feelings. James cleared his throat from the doorway. If you two are finished, we should probably get going. Emily's expecting us for breakfast. Quinn knew it made sense for Beatrice to stay with her cousin until the situation with Wilcox was resolved. Still, watching her leave with James, he felt a profound sense of loss, not just for his homestead, but for the quiet moments they'd shared on her uncle's porch, planning a future that suddenly seemed less certain. As he made his way to the hotel, bone-weary and heartsick, Quinn wondered if perhaps his original instinct had been right after all. Maybe the frontier truly was no place for love, at least not for a man who had made enemies like Hank Wilcox. But even as the thought formed, he rejected it. If the night's events had taught him anything, it was that possessions could be replaced, cabins rebuilt. What couldn't be replaced was the love he'd found with Beatrice. And that, he vowed, was something he would fight to protect, no matter the cost. The next 3 days passed in a haze of activity. Quinn divided his time between helping the marshal search for Wilcox, salvaging what he could from the ruins of his homestead, and checking on Beatrice at her cousin's home. The mysterious strangers who had been seen with Wilcox had vanished as well, heightening Quinn's concern. On the afternoon of the third day, Quinn was at the livery stable, discussing the purchase of lumber for rebuilding his cabin, when a commotion erupted in the street. He stepped outside to find a stagecoach arriving from Helena several days ahead of schedule. As the dust settled, Mr. Thornton emerged from the coach, his face grave. He spotted Quinn immediately and strode toward him with purpose. Mr. Blackett, I came as soon as I got James's telegram about your homestead. Mr. Thornton, Quinn greeted him with surprise. You weren't expected back until tomorrow at the earliest. Some matters are more important than railroad negotiations, the older man replied. How is Beatrice? James assures me she's safe, but... She's fine, Quinn assured him. Staying with James and Emily until we locate Wilcox. Mr. Thornton nodded, visibly relieved. And your plans? James mentioned you lost nearly everything in the fire. Quinn squared his shoulders. I've already ordered lumber. As soon as we catch Wilcox, I'll start rebuilding. It won't be much at first, but... A moment, Mr. Blackett, Mr. Thornton interrupted. Before you commit to rebuilding, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, perhaps over lunch. I've been traveling since dawn and could use a decent meal. Curious, Quinn accompanied Mr. Thornton to the hotel restaurant. After they had ordered and were relatively assured of privacy, the older man leaned forward. I understand you've been spending a great deal of time with my niece these past months. Quinn met his gaze directly. Yes, sir. In fact, I had intended to speak with you upon your return, to ask your blessing to court her formally. Mr. Thornton's expression remained carefully neutral. And now, with your homestead gone and a man who wishes you harm still at large. My feelings haven't changed, Quinn replied without hesitation. If anything, recent events have only confirmed what I already knew, that I love Beatrice and want to spend my life with her. If she'll have me, even knowing that association with you might put her in danger. The question hit Quinn like a physical blow, voicing the fear that had haunted him since the fire. I would give my life to protect her, he said quietly. But if you believe she would be safer without me, I would respect your wishes. Mr. Thornton studied him for a long moment, then sighed. It's not my wishes that concern me, Mr. Blackett. It's Beatrice's future. He paused as their food arrived, waiting until they were alone again before continuing. She had opportunities back east, education, society, security. She chose to stay in Copper Creek out of loyalty to me. I've always wondered if she made the right choice. Have you asked her? Quinn inquired, a note of challenge in his voice. Many times, she always says she's exactly where she wants to be. Mr. Thornton smiled slightly. She's stubborn that way, like her mother. Then perhaps you should trust her judgment, Quinn suggested. Beatrice knows her own mind. Indeed she does, Mr. Thornton's expression softened. Which is why I've never been able to persuade her to do anything she didn't want to do, including, I suspect, staying away from a certain cowboy with a talent for finding trouble. Despite the seriousness of their conversation, Quinn found himself smiling. She is determined. A diplomatic way of putting it. Mr. Thornton took a sip of his coffee. I received another telegram in Helena from an old Army friend now working with the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I asked him to look into Hank Wilcox's background after the incident in the street. Quinn's interest sharpened, and it seems our Mr. Wilcox isn't just a disgruntled drunk. Before coming to Montana, he was wanted in Colorado for arson and attempted murder. He worked as a hired gun for mining companies, intimidating small claim holders into selling. That explains his comfort with violence, Quinn observed grimly. And the strangers seen with him before the fire. Likely old associates, Mr. Thornton confirmed. My friend believes Wilcox may have been hired to drive you off your land. Quinn frowned, but why? My homestead isn't valuable. Just a small parcel with decent water access. Perhaps not valuable now, Mr. Thornton agreed. But with the railroad expanding north next year, land with water rights will become considerably more attractive. The pieces began to fall into place in Quinn's mind. Someone's buying up land ahead of the railroad announcement, trying to position themselves for profit. Precisely, and not being particularly scrupulous about their methods. Mr. Thornton leaned back, studying Quinn thoughtfully. Which brings me to a proposition, Mr. Blackett. I'm listening. I've been looking for someone to help manage the store. Business has been growing steadily, and with James planning to take over his father-in-law's ranch after his wedding next month, I find myself short-handed. The position would include lodging. There's a small apartment above the storeroom that's currently used for storage, but could be converted quite comfortably. Quinn was taken aback by the unexpected offer. Mr. Thornton, I appreciate the thought, but I'm a rancher, not a shopkeeper. You're a man who adapts to circumstances, Mr. Thornton corrected. You've shown good business sense in the deals you've made for your cattle. You're respected in town. And most importantly, my niece cares for you deeply. Are you offering me a job because of Beatrice? Quinn asked directly. I'm offering you a job because I need help, Mr. Thornton replied with equal directness. The fact that it would place you in a position to provide for my niece, should your intentions toward her be serious, is merely a fortunate alignment of circumstances. Quinn considered the offer carefully. His instinct was to refuse, to insist on rebuilding his homestead with his own hands, proving he could provide for Beatrice through his own efforts. But was that pride worth the delay in starting their life together, worth the continued risk to Beatrice's safety while Wilcox remained at large? "I appreciate the offer," he said finally. "But I'd need to discuss it with Beatrice before giving you an answer. This affects her future as much as mine." Mr. Thornton nodded, approval clear in his expression. "A wise approach, Mr. Blackett. I wouldn't expect less." He rose from the table. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I should check on my niece and open the store for the afternoon trade." As Quinn watched the older man leave, he felt a curious mix of emotions. Mr. Thornton's job offer represented a crossroads, a choice between rebuilding what had been destroyed or forging a new path entirely. Either way, the decision would shape not just his future, but Beatrice's as well. With new resolve, Quinn finished his meal and headed toward James's house. Whatever path he chose, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wanted Beatrice beside him every step of the way. Quinn found Beatrice in James's garden, hanging laundry in the late afternoon sun. The sight of her, hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet, sleeves rolled up as she worked, filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Your uncle's back," he called as he approached. "Came in on the noon stage." Beatrice turned, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Quinn, I wasn't expecting to see you until supper." She set down her basket and moved to meet him. "Is everything all right? You look preoccupied." "Just thinking." Quinn took her hands in his, marveling as always at how perfectly they fit within his larger ones. "Your uncle made me an offer to work at the store." Live above it. Surprise flickered across her features, followed quickly by understanding. "Instead of rebuilding your homestead." "Yes." Quinn searched her face, looking for any sign of disappointment. "He says the railroad's coming north next year. Thinks that might be why someone wanted my land badly enough to burn me out." "That would explain Wilcox's involvement," Beatrice agreed, her brow furrowing. "But Quinn, your homestead, you've put so much work into it. I know how much it means to you." Quinn glanced around the peaceful garden, considering his next words carefully. "When I came west after the war, I was looking for a place to hide as much as a place to live. Somewhere I could be alone with my grief. The homestead served that purpose." He paused, gathering his courage. "But that's not what I want anymore." "What do you want?" Beatrice asked softly, her eyes never leaving his. "A future, a life with you." Quinn took a deep breath. "I had planned to speak to your uncle first, do things properly. But after everything that's happened." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold band he'd purchased that morning from the jeweler at the far end of town. "Beatrice Thornton," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart, "I love you. I want to build a life with you, whether that's on a homestead or above a general store or wherever our path leads us. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Quinn Blackett, I will marry you." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Beatrice rested her head against his chest, her voice muffled against his shirt. "What about your homestead? Are you truly willing to give it up?" Quinn considered the question seriously. "The land is still mine, even if the cabin's gone. We could rebuild eventually, maybe as a place to get away from town now and then." He tilted her chin up to meet her gaze. "But home isn't a place, Beatrice. It's wherever you are." The conviction in his voice seemed to settle something within her. "Then I think we should accept Uncle's offer, at least for now. It makes good sense and," she smiled up at him, "I must admit, the thought of having you so close every day is rather appealing." Quinn laughed, feeling lighter than he had in days. "There is that advantage." Their moment of joy was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Quinn turned to see James riding toward them at a gallop, his expression urgent. "Quinn, Beatrice," he called as he reined in his horse. "Marshal Dawson found Wilcox. He's holed up in an abandoned cabin north of town with 2 other men. They've got rifles and have already fired on the marshal's posse." Quinn's protective instincts surged immediately. "Beatrice, go inside. Stay with Emily until we return." To his surprise, she shook her head firmly. "No, this involves both of us now. I'm coming with you." "It's too dangerous," Quinn protested. "These men are armed and desperate." "I'm not suggesting I join the posse," Beatrice clarified. But I won't sit here waiting and wondering. I'll stay in town at a safe distance, but I'm coming." Quinn recognized the determination in her stance, the same unwavering resolve that had first drawn him to her. With a reluctant nod, he helped her onto James's horse, then mounted his own. "Stay close to your cousin," he instructed as they set off, "and promise me you won't do anything reckless." Beatrice's smile was tinged with irony. "I believe you've cornered the market on recklessness in this relationship, Quinn Blackett." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Quinn found himself chuckling. She wasn't wrong. The standoff at the abandoned cabin had drawn quite a crowd by the time they arrived. Marshal Dawson had established a perimeter a safe distance away, and curious townspeople gathered behind it, watching as the lawman and his deputies kept their rifles trained on the dilapidated structure. Quinn helped Beatrice down from James's horse, then made his way to the marshal, leaving her in her cousin's care. "Any change?" he asked, surveying the cabin. It was a small, ramshackle affair with boarded windows and a sagging porch. "The perfect hideout for men on the run. Been quiet for the last half hour," Marshal Dawson replied, not taking his eyes off the cabin. "But they're still in there. Spotted movement through that broken window on the east side not 10 minutes ago." "How do you want to play this?" The marshal glanced at him. "Carefully, Mr. Blackett. I want these men alive to stand trial if possible, especially since we now know Wilcox wasn't acting alone in burning you out." Quinn's jaw tightened. Mr. Thornton mentioned his Pinkerton friend's telegram. "Any idea who hired Wilcox?" "Not yet, but I intend to find out." The marshal raised his voice, calling out to the cabin. "Wilcox, this is your last chance. Come out with your hands up and you'll get a fair trial. Stay in there, and we can't guarantee your safety when night falls." Silence greeted his words, then unexpectedly the cabin door creaked open a few inches. "I want to talk to Blackett," Wilcox's voice called out. "Just him." Unarmed, Quinn felt a cold determination settle over him. This was his chance to end the threat to Beatrice once and for all. "Don't even think about it," Marshal Dawson said, reading his expression. "It's an obvious trap." "Maybe," Quinn agreed. "But it might also be our best chance to resolve this without bloodshed." He unbuckled his gun belt and handed it to the marshal. "Cover me. If anything happens, don't hesitate." "Quinn, no." Beatrice had somehow made her way to them, her face pale with fear. "Please, that's too dangerous." Quinn took her hands, aware that every eye in the crowd was now on them. "I need to end this, Beatrice. For us to have a future, Wilcox can't be a shadow hanging over us." "There are other ways," she pleaded. "Let the marshal handle it." "Trust me," Quinn said softly. "I'm not taking unnecessary risks, not now that I have something to live for." He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead, then turned to the marshal. "I'm going in." Before anyone could stop him, Quinn strode toward the cabin, hands raised to show he was unarmed. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of his boots on the dry ground and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "I'm here, Wilcox," he called when he was halfway to the cabin. "Unarmed, as requested." The door opened wider, revealing Wilcox's haggard face. The man looked terrible, unshaven, bloodshot eyes wild with a dangerous mix of fear and desperation. "That's far enough, Blackett," he growled. "Any closer and my boys will put a bullet in you." Quinn stopped, keeping his hands visible. "I'm told you didn't act alone in burning my place. Someone hired you." A nervous laugh escaped Wilcox. "What's it matter to you now? Place is gone, you lost." "Who was it, Wilcox, who wants my land badly enough to commit murder?" "Wasn't supposed to be murder," Wilcox muttered, glancing back into the cabin as if seeking reassurance from his companions. "Just supposed to scare you off, make you sell cheap before the railroad announcement goes public." Quinn took a careful step forward. "Tell me who, and the marshal might be persuaded to go easier on you. Arson's a serious charge, but if you cooperate." Something shifted in Wilcox's expression, a calculation, a weighing of options. For a moment, Quinn thought he might actually reveal his employer. Then a new voice called from within the cabin. "Don't say another word, Wilcox. Remember who's paying you." The voice was familiar, though Quinn couldn't immediately place it. He strained to see past Wilcox into the shadowy interior of the cabin. "Whoever you are," Quinn called, "it's over." The marshal knows about Wilcox's past in Colorado. The Pinkertons are involved. You can't hide behind hired guns anymore. A figure emerged from the darkness to stand beside Wilcox. Quinn felt a shock of recognition as Harold Carson, owner of the large ranch neighboring his homestead, stepped into the light. "Carson," Quinn's surprise was genuine. "You're behind this." Carson's smile was cold. "Business, Blackett. Nothing personal. Your land controls access to the creek that feeds half the valley. Once the railroad comes through, whoever owns that water access controls everything." He gestured dismissively. "I offered to buy you out fair and square last spring. You refused. So you decided to burn me out instead." Quinn's voice was tight with controlled anger. "As Wilcox said, you were just supposed to be scared off." Carson shrugged. "Things escalated, but here we are." "Here we are," Quinn agreed. "With you facing charges for arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Was it worth it, Carson?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the rancher's face. He glanced at Wilcox, then back at Quinn. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine, and I'm a respected landowner. You're just a drifter who staked a claim." "Maybe," Quinn conceded. "But the marshal has the telegram from the Pinkertons about Wilcox's history in Colorado. How long before they connect you to the mining companies that hired him there?" It was a bluff, but from Carson's expression, it hit close enough to the truth to worry him. "We're wasting time," the third man growled from inside the cabin. "Shoot him and be done with it." "In front of 20 witnesses," Quinn challenged. "The marshal's posse has this place surrounded." "You won't make it a mile." Carson's hand moved to the pistol at his hip, indecision clear in his features. Quinn tensed, ready to dive for cover if necessary. Then, unexpectedly, Wilcox stepped forward. "I ain't hanging for you, Carson," he declared, throwing down his weapon. "I've done some bad things, but I never killed nobody, and I ain't starting now." He raised his hands. "I'm coming out, Marshal. I'll tell you everything." What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and sound. Carson, seeing his hired gun surrender, drew his pistol with a curse. Quinn lunged forward, tackling Wilcox out of the line of fire as a shot rang out. They hit the ground hard, and Quinn felt a searing pain across his upper arm where Carson's bullet had grazed him. More shots followed, the marshal's men returning fire. The third man in the cabin crashed through a rear window, only to find himself face to face with 3 deputies who had circled around back. Carson, realizing he was trapped, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. Within minutes, all 3 men were in custody. Quinn sat on the cabin steps, allowing the town doctor to bandage his arm while Beatrice hovered anxiously nearby. "It's just a scratch," he assured her, wincing slightly as the doctor applied antiseptic. "Barely broke the skin." "A scratch caused by a bullet," Beatrice retorted, her relief manifesting as irritation. "You could have been killed, Quinn Blackett." "But I wasn't," he replied, catching her hand and drawing her closer. "And now it's truly over. Wilcox, Carson, all of it." Marshal Dawson approached, looking weary but satisfied. "Wilcox is singing like a canary. Carson hired him specifically because of his history intimidating small landholders in Colorado. Apparently, they've been planning this for months, waiting for the right opportunity." "And the third man?" Quinn asked. "Carson's foreman. He was the one who actually set the fire on Carson's orders." The marshal shook his head in disgust. "All for a piece of land and water rights. Some men have no sense of decency." "What happens now?" Beatrice asked. "They'll stand trial. With Wilcox's testimony and the evidence we've gathered, they'll likely see the inside of a territorial prison for quite some time." Marshal Dawson glanced at Quinn's bandaged arm. "You took a risk today, Blackett, a foolish one, but it paid off." As the marshal walked away to oversee the prisoner's transport to the jail, Beatrice knelt beside Quinn, her expression serious. "Don't ever do that again," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I was going to lose you before we even had a chance to begin our life together." Quinn cupped her face gently. "I'm not that easy to get rid of," he promised. "Besides, I have too much to live for now." He glanced down at the ring on her finger. "Speaking of which, have you thought about when you'd like to have the wedding?" Beatrice's laugh was watery, caught between tears and joy. "You've just been shot, the doctor is still bandaging you, and you want to discuss wedding dates." Quinn smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace despite the day's chaos. No time like the present. Especially when the present has reminded us how precious life is. Autumn, Beatrice decided, her eyes soft as she looked at him. When the leaves are changing, a new season for a new beginning. Autumn it is, Quinn agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that held all the certainty of their future together. 6 weeks later, as October painted the Montana landscape in hues of gold and crimson, Quinn stood before the small church in Copper Creek, watching as Beatrice walked toward him on her uncle's arm. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory satin that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Flowers adorned her honey-blonde hair, and her smile as their eyes met across the church seemed to Quinn more radiant than any sunrise he had ever witnessed. The past weeks had been busy ones. True to his word, Mr. Thornton had converted the storage space above the general store into a comfortable apartment. Quinn had divided his time between helping with the store and salvaging what he could from his homestead. The land itself remained his, a future possibility perhaps when the railroad came through and they decided what direction their lives would take. Carson and his men had been convicted at a swift trial, their sentences ensuring they would trouble Copper Creek no more. With the threat removed, the town had returned to its peaceful rhythms, embracing Quinn not as an outsider, but as one of their own. The solitary cowboy who had ridden into town for supplies so many months ago now found himself surrounded by community, by connection, by belonging. As Beatrice reached him at the altar, Quinn took her hands in his, marveling at how completely his life had transformed since that first day in the general store. "Ready," she whispered, her eyes bright with joyful anticipation. Quinn squeezed her hands gently. "More than ready," he replied, "for whatever comes next." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion and sacred promises. Quinn spoke his vows with a conviction that surprised even himself, his voice clear and steady as he pledged his life and love to Beatrice before God and the gathered community. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like both an ending and a beginning, the final chapter of his solitary existence and the first page of their shared story. The celebration afterwards spilled from the church into the town square, where tables had been set up and decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. Music filled the air as townsfolk congratulated the newlyweds, offering gifts and well wishes for their future together. As evening approached, Quinn found a moment alone with his bride, drawing her away from the festivities to the relative quiet of the general store's front porch. "Happy Mrs. Blackett?" he asked, still marveling at the sound of her new name. Beatrice's smile was answer enough, but she rose on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him. "And you? Any regrets about trading your solitary homestead for a life above a general store?" Quinn gazed out at the town square, at the community that had become his own, then back at the extraordinary woman who had made it all possible. "Not a single one," he said truthfully. "You were right from the beginning, you know." "About what?" Beatrice asked, leaning into his embrace. "The day we met, you told me that sometimes the things we avoid are exactly what we need most." Quinn brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "I came west believing the frontier was no place for love, that isolation was the only safe choice. But you showed me that true safety isn't found in walls or distance, but in having the courage to let someone in. And you showed me that loyalty isn't just about staying in one place," Beatrice replied. "It's about standing beside someone through whatever comes, good or bad." She touched the faded scar on his arm where Carson's bullet had grazed him. "Even when it's dangerous. Even when it's hard." As the setting sun bathed Copper Creek in golden light, Quinn drew his wife closer, overwhelmed by gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a simple errand for supplies had become the most important crossing of his life, from isolation to connection, from guarded solitude to open-hearted love. "The cowboy asked for loyalty," he murmured against her hair, remembering her words from weeks earlier, "and found something far more precious in return." Beatrice smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting all the love and promise of their future together. "And their journey," she asked softly, "what do you think it will be?" Quinn's answer was simple but certain, filled with all the conviction of a man who had found his true home at last. "Legendary," he promised. "Absolutely legendary." And as they rejoined their celebration, hands linked and hearts full, both knew that whatever paths stretched before them, whether at the general store, on their homestead, or somewhere yet undreamed, they would walk them together, their love a beacon as constant and enduring as the Montana stars shining overhead.